Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the AERA Science Teaching and Learning SIG Monthly Book Chat. I'm Doug Larkin, and I'm really excited to share this chat with you today. Just a few announcements before we get into it. Our upcoming talks, we have 4 left this year. Antar Chichivakunda with Black Campus Life, Alan Feldman, Jawar Sultan, Katie Laux, and Molly Nation in April with Dialogic Collaborative Action Research and Science Education. Maria Ong in May with the Double Bind in Physics Education. And Daniel Morales Doyle, whose name I just saw flash across my screen here. And it's a Wednesday one. So Oki, if you're there, I got one on a Wednesday for Transformative Science Teaching, a Catalyst for Justice and Sustainability. And then we'll restart those again in September. If you are interested in signing up for any of those talks the same way you did tonight, I'm putting the our meetings and other events notice there in the chat. Feel free to click through there and sign up for any of those meetings. I also want to announce, we talked about this last month, but our AERA Science Teaching and Learning SIG will have our reception at the Science History Institute, which if you have not been to that in Philadelphia is a fantastic institution with sort of an amazing set of displays about the history of science. And they've got a couple special exhibits that are really, we spent hours in there the other day getting ready for this. So that's going to be on Friday, April 12th from 5 to 7 p.m. and past and future SIG members are welcome. We're really looking forward to that. It's a little bit east of the convention center, not too far away. You have to walk past Independence Hall to get to it. Okay. And so now it is my pleasure to introduce our 2 authors for this evening. Dr. Edna Tan is Hook's Distinguished Professor of STEM Education at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Her collaborative research investigates what constitutes equitable and consequential science and engineering learning for historically underrepresented, minoritized youth across learning contexts and over time. Dr. Angela Calabrese Barton is Chair of the Educational Studies and Professor of Science Education and Learning Sciences at the University of Michigan. She studies approaches to science teaching and learning in school and community settings that disrupt and transform systemic injustices in learning environments serving minoritized youth and that promote justice-oriented outcomes. So welcome, Angie and Edna. We're delighted to have you here at our Science Teaching and Learning Book Talk.
Thanks,
Thank
Doug.
you for having us. Yeah, thanks everyone for showing up in the evening on a weekday. We're really glad to be here. Okay. Should I share screen, Angie? I don't know.
Sure, that's great. Yeah.
Okay. See if this works.
Yeah. Oh, do I need to turn on permissions or are you good? Here, let's see.
I think I should be.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Is this good?
Yep.
Okay. Great. Now we can't really see our notes, but it's fine because we wanted to have a conversation.
We're good.
Yeah, we're good. So we want to start the book conversation by sharing some voices from the field, from the youth that we work with, and then from the teachers that we work with.
Yeah, so I'll get us started. And actually, the other thing we want to say about this is the youth and the teachers we have worked with, they're the reasons why we wrote this book. And as you listen to these quotes, we maybe want you to think about, because how they got us thinking about the insufficiency of framing equity as about inclusion. And so we'll start with this quote from Sana, and she says, "When you walk into some classrooms, you feel they don't want you there."
And Samuel, he says, teachers care, but they do not care about the community all of the time. We go outside on our time and find places where we can do science and engineering for our communities. School doesn't know how to do that. School doesn't know that we do that. And we need to tell our teachers how we do it. We've got to help them.
And this next quote comes from Jasmine, 15 years old. She shared this with us when in June 2020. And she says the racist stereotype is that Black people are not listening to science, but that is not true. Maybe it's the other way around, like science is not listening to us. I just wish that people could see what I could do, like what I'm doing at home, making homemade hand sanitizers, making masks, caring for my elders. I don't want to act white. I don't want people to tell me I'm not white enough. I want you to know how I feel as a young Black girl in America and in STEM. I want to feel like I can be me in STEM and have that celebrated.
Okay. So what are the youth saying about their belonging in schooling in STEM and whether they feel welcomed and why? So youth are saying that they are invisible in school, that may be missing despite their embodied presence.
They're saying that they're noticed for their deficits and not their strengths.
They're saying that their hopes, fears, dreams, and worries are not part of teaching and learning science, at least not explicitly.
They're saying that
Angie?
their community science expertise is not noticed and perhaps not valued in schools.
That they have limited opportunities to have ownership over materials and activities.
And they're not recognized for who they are and what they want to know.
And that they have to be white to be acknowledged.
And they have to fight stereotypes on their own.
Okay, so now we want to talk about the teachers and what they say to us. So this is Mr. M, and he works in the poorest congressional district in the nation. And he tells me, us, and also his other colleagues, he said, I remind myself to not underestimate my students' abilities. You don't know why they are in this environment, but it doesn't mean that they are not as intelligent or motivated.
And here's what Miss Kay shared with us. She said, I always ask myself, what would I want for my own child? A respect for humanity, someone you love and trust to spend that time and teach them. It's so important to show kids you trust them. You have to earn that trust. If I say something, I'm going to follow through, then I'm going to follow through. This is our family. My students call our classroom that. Everyone has a voice.
So I guess we wanted to share the quotes and the voices because they are the reason why we wrote this book. And spending time with youth and teachers and community members across settings for many years led us to conclude that equity as inclusion is really insufficient. And so with this book, what we tried to do is to offer another framework that is could be argued as more radical about rightful presence in middle school STEM. So if you get a copy of our book, this is the table of contents. It's laid out. It's only 6 chapters, so it's not really onerous to read. But we go through the framework in the first chapter. We ground everything in classroom stories. Chapters 2 and 3 are about really what we learn from observing in these classrooms, the teachers. Chapter 2 is about youth bidding for rightful presence, and they have historically been bidding for rightful presence. Chapter 3 is about teachers responding to student bids. Angie, do you want to talk about chapters 4 and 5?
Yeah, so what we do in chapters 4, 5, and 6 is we talk about strategies that teachers have enacted and really have begun to name for themselves as ways to begin to disrupt that guest host relationality in classrooms that are the markers of not having a rightful presence. And so what we do in chapter 4 is talk about co-production as one design approach to working with young people. And it goes beyond co-design to really thinking about the ways in which design extends into the everyday interactions in classroom as young people and teachers co-produce units across time together. Chapter 5 looks at a practice that is called pedagogies of community ethnography. And here we describe both the core practices of pedagogies of community ethnography and then describe how those play out in practice and how
Action, can you come raise my
and how those support more expansive learning outcomes towards rightful presence. And in the last chapter, we try to synthesize and pull these ideas together to provide the reader with some reflective tools for thinking about how can I begin to enact this in practice.
Okay, so Doug, we're actually going to stop sharing now for conversation.
That's wonderful. Thank you both. And I just want to let you know, so I've read the book. I enjoyed it immensely. I'm coming into it with that particular bias. And one of the reasons I enjoyed it is that it really challenged me in a good way to rethink some of the fundamental aspects of STEM classrooms, despite the fact I've been following both of your work for decades. I enjoyed the fact that this presented me with something new to think about. And so I want to start with, one of the main themes of your book is critiquing the notion of equity as simply inclusion. And the presentation of classrooms as representing a guest-host relationship, to me, was provocative. That was the piece that was really new to me as I read and reread and wrap my brain around what the implications of that are. So it got me thinking of all the various ways that a teacher is almost like automatically placed in this host role right from the start. And so I wonder if we could just start by talking about how does a classroom look different if either through the guest host lens or when you're looking at it through a different framing, and how does the rightful presence framework change that guest host relationship?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start off by saying that when we think about the guest host relationship, we're really talking about a power relationship. And that is that, teachers, school administrators, they host students in classrooms. And, in the most benevolent of circumstances, students are really welcomed in. They really feel like they're welcome guests in these spaces, but they're always, they always experience schooling through that power relation, meaning that they have to abide by the rules that the host puts forward. So you can think about it. Many of us have done Airbnb before, right? We are guests in those spaces. We have to follow those rules or we're going to get a bad rating and maybe never get an Airbnb again. And when we think about science teaching and learning, we have to ask ourselves, what are those rules based on? And those rules are based on white heteropatriarchy, settler colonialism. These all drive what it means to be a good student in these spaces, to succeed in these spaces. They define what learning looks like. They define what participation looks like. They define all aspects of how we are and what we do and how that gets measured in these spaces. And so when we talk about equity as inclusion, we're talking about extending the right to participate, but it's within these structured and fixed guest-host relationships. We want to disrupt that. We want to think about the ways in which we can shift those power relations so that students aren't just guests in these spaces, but they actually have a rightful presence.
Yeah, that is also part of the reason why, like Angie, we have a little bit of concern with the language of welcomeness, right? So you're feeling welcome. You're feeling welcome. If you're a guest, do you feel welcome, right? This language of hospitality. And really it's the youth that we work with that tell us. So there's this youth in high school. No, he was in 8th grade, brilliant black boy. And he was working with us in our after-school engineering program. We were using the Maker kit called Little Bits. And, and he was telling us, if this were in my classroom, there is no way I'll be allowed to touch them, right? So then you think about the welcomeness and being a guest is contingent on a behavioral code, right? So Peter was telling us, because my teacher has decided that I am ill-behaved and therefore I cannot be trusted with these really expensive things. And I can tell you who are the boys that she will allow to play with this, but it is not me, and it will not be me, right? So these stories that we hear in the informal settings that we've been in help us to look with a different eyes and when we are in the classrooms, right? To see how is it that unintentionally, maybe it's unintentional because it's been so normalized, right? That behavioral norms became the code of conduct by which rights are rescinded, right? From participating in science activity systems that really has nothing to do with whether this boy was just yelling in the path in the corridor or not before he came into class, right? Why is that therefore then a factor that is gatekeeping him from participating in science class? So we're seeing a lot of these scenarios happening.
Actually, I'm going to build on that even further, because, Edna, you mentioned the hallway, right? And so, who young people are in classrooms extends beyond that classroom space, extends into the hallways, into the school community, into their homes, and into their communities. And an important part of rightful presence and thinking about disrupting this guest host relationalities is this notion of making present. Like, what does it mean to really have presence in a space? And it's not just about being there in a bodily fashion. It's not even just about saying, okay, in the best case scenario for the student Edna was talking about, you can touch this stuff now, but how is a kid recognized for their whole lives in the past, in the historicized past that they've experienced and have brought into the space just as a part of who they are, to the future that they desire for themselves? And what do we do in the space to make this past, present, and future bridge together, to make the past, present, and future visible as both points of disruption and intervention and as points of possibility? We talk about in Rightful Presence the critical importance of making both injustice and the possibilities for justice visible as critical elements of disrupting this guest host power relationality. Because if we don't recognize the kinds of historicized injustices some of our young people have experienced, and I'm particularly talking about youth of color and youth from low economic backgrounds in school settings, then we're automatically denying them a rightful presence, because these are the foundation upon which, Western schooling is built, these injustices.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. I think one of the things I like about our line of work is we can talk about things like critical justice studies in the same sentence as worm poop, which you do in the book. Can you talk a little bit about the decision to focus this book, and I would say by extension a large part of the scholarship that both of you are bringing prior to this book, on students in middle schools or middle grades?
Oh, that's a very good question. And we talked about this beforehand. That was a good question because it got us thinking about why. So prior to this, Angela was thinking about it. And I think we spend a lot of time teaching in middle grades. I did. Most of my teaching is in the middle grades and like the first year of high school. So that's where, our own grounded experiences are. We also know that middle grades is where the interest in science drops precipitously. That is in the research, especially for youth of color. We are both in teacher education programs, and middle school is really, I think, an age where kids are going through a lot of changes, but also a lot of possibilities and also a lot of risks, right? And I think as a result, Angela was lamenting that we've been finding it really hard. She's in Michigan, I'm in North Carolina, to recruit teachers who want to be middle school teachers. Yeah. Angie, you want to talk more about the teachers?
Oh, yeah, I'll say a few additional things. First, well, we both just love that age, middle school. Youth at that age have so much energy, and they're exploring new freedoms and new forms of agency as they start to grow older. And there's just real possibility at that age to engage critically with young people about themselves and their classroom and school and local communities. It's just I think such a powerful space to bring together STEM and, critical thought about the world. But when Edna said you want to talk about the teachers, I think one really important aspect of this work is that teacher turnover rate and teacher burnout is extraordinarily high in the middle grades. It's really, really hard to get people to teach in the middle grades. And so, part of our long-term effort over the last 2 decades has been to work in research practice partnerships with teachers in middle schools. in looking for collaborative ways to support the learning of their young people, and at the same time to support teachers in finding, renewed joy and energy themselves in their teaching practices. And so one of the teachers that we talk about in this book, Mr. M, when we first started working with him, he's a little burnt out, and he was, I would argue, and he'd probably even call himself like a skill and drill kind of teacher. Monday was introduce new idea lecture, take notes. No, sorry. Monday was review from the past week. Tuesday was introduce an idea, take notes. Same with Wednesday. Thursday was vocab, and Friday was catch up from the rest of the week. But over the course of 5 years, as we worked with him collaboratively, he's the one who really got us thinking about this notion of co-production, because he started bringing students into his classroom at lunchtime for lunchtime conversations to think about how could he teach differently. He became not only a different teacher in terms of his practice, he became a much more joyful teacher, and his relationships with his students, which were always strong because he always invited students into his classroom during recess to care for the plants and animal in his room, but they really blossomed, and he became a real leader in the school for his ability to form strong and powerful relationships with students and to teach in really exciting, productive ways. So we actually think working towards rightful presence, even though it is challenging, it is fraught because we're asking people to disrupt normative power structures in schools, can be a space for teacher renewal as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to add on sorry. So just one thing, like the right to reauthor rights, which is the first tenet of our framework, applies to teachers as much as it applies to students, right? And to the classroom community as a whole. So one thing that continues to fascinate us is the teachers being able to humanize themselves through engaging in allied political struggles with their students and with community, that it is okay for your teachers to smile. And Angie can tell you that lovely story about the stern-faced woman teacher who did not crack a smile, who did a limbo dance from the engineering curriculum. And that was, that was a watershed moment, right? For the relationships of the kids and the teachers.
I cheered at that part of the book. Like, I actually was like, yes, when you wrote about that.
And I will say the hallway of fourth and sixth graders erupted. It was a watershed moment for that teacher and for the school community. Yeah.
Well, thanks. I mean, I really love that idea that the reauthoring applies to the teachers themselves. To me, that shows the power of this framework, right? When you can apply it to other things. I'm going to ask one more question, but in the meantime, I'm going to ask anybody who's participating. I want to really encourage you. This is an opportunity to dialogue with authors. You don't have to have read the book. You can just take anything that we've said so far and run with it and ask our authors more about that. I'm going to ask a little bit more about that right to reauthor rights, because I think that was something, that's a central part of this, it's one of the tenets of the rightful presence framework. And I found myself, even though it's connected to these notions of political clarity and allyship and political struggles, and I know it connects to power and agency in a deep way, but I still had, I wonder if you could just unpack what you mean by that, the right to reauthor rights. Because it does seem like this powerful, way of thinking about what happens in classrooms.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. And I think if it's okay, I want to back up just a little bit to the origins of rightful presence, or at least our introduction to it. We learned about this notion of rightful presence by reading work in political sociology, geared towards understanding the work of sanctuary cities. And this was at a time where my city in 2016 had decided to become a sanctuary city, got a lot of right-wing backlash, and then decided to unbecome a sanctuary city, which is quite disappointing because we have a large refugee center in our city. So we were just reading about sanctuary cities, and this idea grows out of as I said, this work in political sociology, because it really was working to trouble assumptions of what it means to be inclusive in the present as migrants and refugees come into sanctuary cities. So we can use this to begin to think about what does it mean to have rights and what does it mean to reauthor rights. And so, you know, as refugees and immigrants are welcomed into sanctuary cities, they're extended rights by their hosts to participate. But what does that really look like when somebody's extended rights? Okay. You have the right to have a job. You have the right to have shelter. You have the right to have food in the classroom. You have the right to have a seat in my classroom. You have a right to take a test. You have a right to do these activities. You have the right to take notes. These rights are undergirded by the dominant power structures that have already put into fixed place what it means to participate and to successfully be in these spaces. And so as recipients of rights, whether it's refugees in sanctuary cities or students, you're having to work within a power structure that was never intended to serve you. And so when we talk about the right to reauthor rights, we're talking about, first of all, making visible the power structures that undergird these rights. So if we're saying you have the right to have a seat in my classroom, then who is saying that? Why is it being said in this particular way? Then you can ask the opposite question, who doesn't have the right? And what does that mean? What does it mean to lose this right? All of these things are meant to make visible what this right is really based on. And then to begin to reauthor rights, we're asking to then to further shine the light on what young people are bringing to this space in terms of who they are and what they hope for out of this space, who they are and what they've experienced previously, whether it's positive or negative through the kinds of oppressions one experiences in school, so that that can become the stuff upon which we can begin to think about what a different way of having rights in the space might be. So one of the examples we use in our book is a vignette we call "Unless You're Black," because that's a quote from Amir, a 12-year-old boy. This takes place in a forensic science lesson, and he's Black. And that's an important part of the story, because when the teacher is wrapping up the unit and the students, and he's having a discussion with the students around why it's very important to use evidence to make fair decisions in forensics investigations, he interrupts his teacher and says, "Unless you're Black." And he says, "If you're Black, you'll be convicted." And the teacher, you know, pauses in this moment, and he says to Amir, I can't remember exactly, but something to the effect of, "That's a really important thing to say, but we can't quite talk about it here in this moment. If you want to talk about it another time, we absolutely can do that." And Amir never talks to his teacher about it again. And so if we look at that moment, we can begin to think about how there was an opportunity to begin to reauthor rights by the teacher recognizing the ways in which forensic science is racialized, but he didn't take it up. Instead, he extended that right to participate in his class. But when Amir was bidding to reauthor rights to say, "Hey, can we have this conversation?" that got shut down. Not sure that was very clear.
Thank you. So I'm going to open up the if you would like to just raise your digital hand, feel free to do that. Angie and Ed, we've learned with these that like wait time takes a little bit longer just for folks to ask their question, but I do want to encourage participation, even if you just want to say, "Can you tell me more about blank?" We can do those kinds of questions too. So I'm going to pause and give a little wait time for either a hand or a question to show up in the chat. Otherwise, I got plenty more. But.
Okay, so I want to say that while we wait, we want to emphasize that we don't want the teacher bash, right? So Mr. A, the forensic science teacher, he's a really good teacher. He's a white guy, a really good teacher. Kids like him a lot. And the fact that he came back to unpack this episode, right, it says a lot about him figuring out allied political struggle, right? Figuring out the concept of rightful presence and thinking about what it is he could have done to work towards seeding a more rightful presence for Amir. So Mr. A is doing the work.
Thanks.
I
Okay.
see a hand, Doug.
Yeah, so Azaria Cunningham, go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering, so you shared like Amir's story and you shared his story in your book. I'm wondering how people who read these stories, how do you navigate having teachers take a deficit perspective on students of color? Because you're surfacing their lived experiences and ideas as like authors in this work. How are you making sure that you know, negative connotations associated with Amir's and his race and him being whole in that classroom are not negative?
I think you're asking such a really important question. One of the ways that we work on this with teachers is and I forget what chapter this is in, but we talk about youth bids towards rightful presence. And so oftentimes, one of the ways in which teachers' deficit perspectives can play out is through their interpretation of students' actions and behaviors as being quote unquote deviant. And what we mean by that is being different from what they expect or different than what the rights they extended require. And what we're trying to explore with teachers is to really just stop and pause and to make sense of what are students really asking in that moment. You know, Amir wasn't trying to be deviant in any way. He was trying to make sense of everything that's going on around him in his everyday life that actually matters in his forensic science classroom. And so if we can stop and begin to see youth's actions like calling out in class as a bid to be recognized, as a bid to be heard, as a bid to be seen as fully human, then how do we begin to understand our students differently and hopefully support teachers who may have deficit perspectives to begin to shed those and to see their students with the brilliance they have and the questions that they're asking. I mean, the guts that it took Amir to stop and ask that question for a 12-year-old, that's profound, right? And how do we honor that in a way that brings forward his question to advance, you know, teacher learning and teacher practice?
Yeah, I will also just add that when we've shared Amir's case study with practicing teachers, we often invite them to pause and think about either when have you as a student felt like Amir and when have you as a teacher felt like Mr. A, right? So locating in our own experiences as students, when we feel that our humanity was questioned or that we were not fully supported, and also at the same time, feeling the dilemma of a teacher, right? In not having the full picture, worrying about other students, and sitting with that to think about as a group, we found very helpful because it surfaces different perspectives. Not that the perspectives in any way should be ranked or not, but it gives the complexity of like this one snapshot, right? That even Mr. A is still trying to figure out how could I have, you know, done a better job that is helpful to Amir and it's helpful to the rest of the class, right? So all to say that no easy answers. Sorry, my dog is being very noisy. But I think going back to our own experiences and talking with our colleagues is one way to sort of lower the temperature in a room and think about the fact that there are problematic deficit frames that teachers hold for particular groups of students that need to be encountered and talked about.
Thanks. We have another hand, and then I have there's a question in the chat. I think that's direct to me though. Preeta?
Oh, hi. I was wondering if you have any suggestions on how we can include some of these tenets related to rightful presence in like a professional development program for science teachers who have mainly multilingual learners in their classroom, especially the newcomers who are not very familiar with the English language. So how do we, we're looking into that. We're working with some teachers and we're really interested in incorporating some of these into our framework. And so I'm wondering if you had any suggestions. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. We have chapter 5. So chapter 4 and 5 are really grounding the tenets that can sound very theoretical, but it's all born from the field, right? So even though the tenets sound scary, they are really very mundane and very doable, which I think is why we are so excited about this framework, right? It's nothing that is your loud activism kind of resistance, right? That is important, but difficult in the day-to-day of teaching and learning. So in chapters 4 and 5, we do talk about how teachers have been using these tenets in classrooms. Chapter 6, especially with multilingual students.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask Andy to jump in because I'm sure she can tell you about the Make a Friend board is completely based in ELL students in a classroom doing STEM.
All right.
Oh, well, I'll say one other thing first before I talk about Make a Friend. We also have some supportive tools that can support teacher professional learning around the rightful presence tenets and the pedagogical and design strategies that our partner teachers have used that also could be helpful in these settings that you could tailor to your own specific context. So we have a self-reflection rubric that guides teachers in thinking about how their classroom culture supports or I would say facilitates or constrains opportunities for working towards rightful presence. And we can unpack classroom culture as including, you know, the discursive norms, forms of participation, division of labor, and that sort of thing.
Sure.
We also have some teacher-friendly tools that kind of break down what pedagogies of community ethnography are and can be. That has been particularly helpful in working with teachers because what it does is it invites students to be experts of their own lives and communities and to bring that in to the units that they're studying. We've integrated pedagogies of community ethnography in engineering and in biological sciences and our work with teachers. Edna can talk about what that looks like in a stress unit that she recently enacted with our partner teachers this past year. Edna was referencing the Make a Friend board. So this was part of a unit on engineering for sustainable communities. And I can't remember if we talk about this example in the book or not, but in this particular engineering unit, students have to, as a final design challenge, design a working prototype that works towards sustainable communities. And the constraints around this is they have to show 2 energy transformations because that's part of the content that they're learning. So for example, solar energy to electrical energy to light energy. They can only use the following materials: copper tape, LED lights, a renewable energy source, and anything that's reusable or reusable or recyclable from their classrooms or schools. Okay, so it's a sustainability engineering challenge. And one group made the Make a Friend board. And and this was really challenging for them. They ran into so many technical challenges. They ended up having this beautiful big board where they had 2 lights in parallel circuit and they had attached it to a hand crank generator. So when you crank the lights, it lit up. But the real energy that they put into, pardon the pun there, making this project was they attended a school that served the refugee center, and there are more than 20 languages spoken in the school. And they became and one of the students, it was 2 girls. One of the student was an immigrant to the country and one was white, English speaking. And they decided that like the biggest problem was that kids were getting bullied now because of the, you know, era that we were living in with immigrants. And so they went around the school as part of their ethnography to document all the ways in which you could say, with all the languages in the school, can I be your friend? Make a friend, welcome. And they added this to their board. And then they put strategies for how you could begin to make friends across linguistic and cultural differences. Everything is simple from sharing your snack that you brought with somebody who doesn't have a snack. So just think about how they're understanding ways in which you can reach out, to finding somebody who's by themselves at recess. The project became so successful, they decided it didn't belong in their classroom. It belonged at the front of the school by the front office, because they were learning that even if they made friends at schools, their parents might not allow those friendships to exist outside of schools. So now you can see how this stretches into broader societal power structures. And they wanted parents to make friends with each other. And so every time somebody made a new friend, they got to crank the board and light it up. And it became a fixture in the school. And it really worked to not only transform what happened in that classroom, but the whole culture of the school. That's an example of reauthoring rights, right? Who has the right to be in the school? Who has the right to leverage this board to try to disrupt what it means to make friendships across cultural and linguistic difference?
Thanks.
Thank you
We're
so
gonna do a
much.
question from the chat. Thanks, Preeta.
Thank you.
Lillian, would you like to read your question, or I can read it if you prefer? I'll just read them. Yeah, I'll go ahead and read it. Not everybody's in a place where they can unmute. Thank you so much for this framework and this conversation. I think an additional challenge are the structures beyond the classroom that create inequities. For example, there's a standardized curriculum that teachers need to get through, and they are held accountable for this curriculum with siloed testing. In middle school, there is tremendous potential to create interdisciplinary units with multiple subjects that could highlight injustice and justice as a central focus. Have you thought about the curriculum beyond STEM, connecting across the middle school landscape?
Maybe I can talk a little bit about the stress unit. So with the stress unit, we work with middle school teachers and parents. So this is our latest iteration of the right to reauthor rights, allied political struggles, where we invite parents for RPP co-design of curriculum. So that's really exciting, and it's happening right now in Michigan and in North Carolina. And in this particular unit, the parents that we worked with are immigrants. They come from other countries, they speak different languages, and for some of them, their older children are undocumented, right? And so the purpose of the curriculum is to tie the physiology of stress, which is in the life science standards for middle school, to systemic issues, systemic environment, systemic oppression. So one of the issues we focused on was redlining, right? Another issue we focused on were immigration policies. So these were, historically not, right, in your science canon. And the students got really into the issues. So we brought in the social studies teacher who was also really interested in exploring the history of redlining and immigration policies, and also school funding, right? Due to property taxes and, oh my gosh, what is the term? Or people moving out of neighborhoods? I'm blanking on it right now.
White
gentrification. Yes, gentrification. So all these societal issues, right, that a majority of the students are experiencing and living through were issues that could be talked about in social studies. And so that is how the bridge, concretely, one bridge is being made in this one school. Again, the social studies teacher was amenable because the students were going from science to social studies, asking him about all these issues, right? So now, it was an organic evolution. The science teacher and the social studies teacher are getting together to talk about this and how they can collaborate with the next cohort of students with the stress curriculum.
Thanks. So the next question comes from Chandrika Burrell, and she prefaces by saying, I think you already started to talk about this with the description of co-production and reauthorship. Can you speak to the science teachers and how they practiced rightful presence in their classrooms? What did it look like for students? How did students experience it? And for the teachers who practiced rightful presence, how did they arrive at the practice?
Wow.
Good
That's
question.
a hard,
They-
it's a hard question. I'm not arriving at the practice. I think it's an always in process. Rightful presence is not something Edna or I think is like ever achieved. We're always working towards it. We're always sort of peeling away at these layers. And one of the things that we'll say straight up about, the theoretical work that we've done about rightful presence and its, policy and practice implications is that it's really from the ground up. Like this, even though I mentioned the work in political sociology that we've read, these ideas have grown out of the work of teachers and youth that we've had the privilege of learning with as we see some of the amazing things that they're doing in their classroom spaces. So what does it look like when you walk into a classroom where a teacher's working towards rightful presence? I would say that you see students who are actively participating, but in ways that allow them to be themselves. So you see lots of a wide range of science identities that are playing out and welcomed in that space. You see teachers and students negotiating what powerful learning looks like through extended ways of like showing what expertise looks like. So when I talked about the engineering unit where students made these projects, not only do these projects live in the school, so learning goes beyond what's required in that unit, it becomes a part of the life of the school, but they thought about other interesting ways in which they wanted to demonstrate that expertise. They made postcards of their work that became trading cards to share how they were engineering experts that made a difference in their school. And they made videos about these. In the stress unit, they made PSAs that were played over the intercom at their school. And so the ways in which learning takes shape is about so much more than just sort of the content and practices we expect students to learn. That teachers and students are grappling together with, like, how does this matter in the here and now? And how can this transform how we are and who we are together in these spaces?
Yeah, if I can
Yeah,
just,
I'll just, yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead, Doug.
oh, I was
No, I was
just
just gonna say, okay.
you're the one. No, your ball.
No, I was gonna say that our teachers, the teachers, like they pause, like literally they pause, right? One thing in learning to teach for rightful presence and figuring out your own rightful presence as a teacher is coming to realize that you don't know a lot of stuff, right? You don't know a lot of things about the students and their environments and their lives outside of the classroom that they bring in with themselves. And so it is okay to pause. In fact, you should pause and you should ask and you should wait, right? The wait time thing. So we've seen teachers learn how to pause, which admittedly is really difficult. And we've also seen teachers take risks, right? So this is a really risky thing to do, right? We're asking them to disrupt what they know to be the norm and in which they've been trained, in which they themselves as students have gone through and jumped through the hoops and have succeeded. We're saying that, all right, you should try to disrupt that a little bit and see what happens. And that is scary.
And I just,
For some of the, right. Yeah.
Can I just give a quick example because it's so mundane? And I was thinking about this with all the testing. We had one partner teacher whose students, so she was learning from her students through, these collaborative conversations that they're just bored. They're bored. School is not fun, and they need to do things to change it. And she said, she's like, I've got blinders on, in the sense that I have this stuff I have to cover. I'm going to get through it. I know I'm a good teacher. I want them to do good on the test, and they're going to do good. And, she's a great teacher. Things get done in that classroom. Kids do well. But they're bored and school is not fun. And that really troubled her. And so they came up with a social contract. Well, it was tied to a light up limbo stick, and that's another part of the story. But the social contract, I think, is so much more powerful because they came to an agreement that, you know what, okay, we agree, this class can get really boring and we need to disrupt that. They came up with a song playlist together. They came up with signals that they would kind of secretly show the teacher when they were getting bored, and she would literally stop the class and say, okay, we're gonna have a little dance party right now, we're gonna play some music, we're gonna limbo. It didn't necessarily solve like what she was teaching or how she was teaching all the time, but the kinds of changes as we work towards rightful presence doesn't happen overnight. It's not going to happen in one thing. She started to build relationships with her students. She started to begin to acknowledge and legitimize their feelings of boredom and unfun and unjoy in her space. And she began to change that. And as those relationships build, they share more things with her, which then influence her practice more. And so those kinds of starting points are just as important. Okay, sorry, Edna.
No, that's
Carry on.
perfect. That's perfect. Yeah.
I was
So
gonna
like you can
ask-
change the activity systems, is what we're saying.
Right. Well, I was going to ask, a lot of theories of teacher change require either one of two things, either the teacher taking up a practice and seeing what happens, or the teacher themselves identifying a problem of practice and working to change it in some way. And what I heard in your answer, Angie, was that the boredom was the problem, right? Like things could have been fine from a different metric, the principal walking by and seeing an orderly classroom metric, scored high, but on the, like, is it fun to be here, scored low. And the teacher recognizing that as a problem rather than as like I finally made it to being a teacher who can have a classroom like this. Like that reframing seems really important. And I'm wondering, like, if your presence there was the catalyze that, or do you think that was they were searching for solutions to that particular problem? Or I'm just kind of asking about the teacher change piece of this. I like the idea that they liked their jobs more and they felt better about being teachers once they started down this rightful presence path. But I'm wondering about that larger question of teacher change.
Yeah, I think this goes back to our tenet, the last tenet. Actually, everything that wraps up is the collective allied political struggle, right? And so Angie and myself and our research team, we are stakeholders, right, in this work together with the teachers and the youth. And we shamelessly use our privilege, right? Like we will shamelessly go and talk to the principal, ask them to come to the classroom. Hey, look and see what this teacher is doing, because we have to build political capital, right? For the teachers who are disrupting the classroom in this way and doing really good work needs recognition from the higher ups with power, because as the kids tell us, I'm a sixth grader now, right? We need to have long-term goals, but we also need to have timely goals in the here and now, right? And in order to address the here and now, we need to bring in stakeholders like principals and superintendents and all that. So Angie and I both, we do that. We will talk to the principals, drag them in, that's why funding helps. We bring all the materials. We spend all our time in the classroom. The grad students are there. We are there ourselves as co-teachers. So it is really, we are co-laboring, right? If I can use that term. We are still outsiders, but showing up to and being with teachers, helping them, just, even just handing out papers, right? Is really important because teachers are exhausted. And this is hard work, right? And so I think that's why for our work is we are really entrenched in the site, and we work with teachers across time, same teachers for many years, because we feel like we need to earn our own rightful presence in the schools, right? Because who are we as researchers who don't know anything about the community to come in and tell you what you should do? Like, no, that's not our approach. We earn our own rightful presence by being there, putting in the work, co-laboring, talking to teachers, parents, sitting in a lunchroom, chaperoning field trips. We do all that to earn our rightful presence. So we feel like we at least have, 3 legs amongst the 2 of us to stand on, just because of the amount of time we have spent in the field.
Okay, well, speaking of amounts of time, we have about 6 minutes left. And I think our next question is from Raymond Bangs. Would you like me to ask it, or you want to ask? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, there I am. Yeah, I just wanted to find out if there were, where's my question here? If there was movement or initiatives or programs at a national level that have been successful in promoting rightful presence in the STEM education, and what lessons can we learn from these programs? And if there are perhaps institutions, policymakers, and industry partners who might support the Rightful Presence initiative.
Ooh, I think that's a great question. it's a relatively new framework. We've worked with, what's the name of the Equity Center, Edna?
Yes. I'm blanking on that.
Okay, while she's looking that up, so we can tell you about that. Like I'm right now working with the Michigan Science Teachers Association. We're having our state meeting at the end of this week. So I'll be working with a group of teacher leaders around rightful presence. So there is some movement, you know, at the state level. We're working with a national equity policy group. Edna, did you find it?
Sorry, no, I'm still looking.
I can look too. We'll tell you the name of them in a minute. And they've developed a framework around equity in equity work in schools, where they're drawing on rightful presence is like they have several arms. And so rightful presence is one of those arms. And so that's how we're working to get some of this into policy. But I'd be really interested in, and I'm sure Edna is too, like in hearing from all of you, like if this is an idea that resonates with you, how can we think about having an impact, you know, on next generation science standards or other state and federal policies that help us to begin to tailor some of the work that we're doing so that it orients towards rightful presence as both a process and a goal of the work we're doing in STEM classrooms.
Thank you.
I'll just say if there's
Swift
a link that
Education
you find-
Center, right? That's the one. I will put it down here. The Swift Education Center.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Well, I am genuinely delighted that you've been able to join us this evening. Again, the book is Teaching Toward Rightful Presence in Middle School STEM. Thank you both, Edna Tan and Angela Calabrese Barton, for joining us today. I hope that other people enjoy and are able and find this book useful. I think the rightful, I found myself walking around interpreting things through rightful presence frameworks and reauthoring, and that's, to me, that's a mark of a powerful framework that you can't stop thinking about it after you've put the book down. So thank you so much, and I want to wish everybody a good night. I'm going to stop the recording now, and if there's any chit chat at the end, that's fine too. Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Good night.